Hello everyone, as always I'm Vlad Sparastoria. With me today is Andy Martin, CEO of C.R.O.W. If you don't know, the C.R.O.W. are a group of volunteer rangers who go to Africa, but also to other parts of the world to protect rare species from the scourge of poaching. If you want to know more about their incredible work, Andy and I did a wonderful live stream some time ago where he explained many details about their job. I'll leave it in the description and you can click on the top right corner. But today we're here to talk about something else, something a bit more practical. We're here to talk about the weapons of the Rangers. Andy, let me ask you the first question. You don't have much choice when it comes to weapons because you use what you're given, basically. Explain this to me. How does it work? You arrive and receive the weapons.
Yes, every park has a small armory, and depending on the country's regulations and their budget, these are the weapons used by the rangers who deal with anti-poaching. Sometimes there are also weapons, let's say, for big game hunting for the rangers who accompany tourists, those who might have to stop a buffalo or elephant charge, toward the vehicle or even the tourists themselves during a walking safari. Our armories are generally very simple. We have very few types of platforms. They vary from country to country. There are some platforms that are more common, but there is definitely a common denominator, which is reliability. Our platforms are all super reliable, super battle tested for many years.
Today, to talk about these weapons, we made a sort of ranking, a podium, you could say. In third place on the podium are the good old battle rifles like the FAL and the G3, even though, depending on the geographic area, we could say, along with the G3, which is kind of, yes.
The G3 is a weapon that is used a lot in Kenya, especially by the C.R.O.Ws, which is the Kenyan police responsible for protecting animals, and they typically use the old G3S from the Kenyan army. Meanwhile, the FAL is much more common, for example, in countries like South Africa, where, let's remember, the R1 was basically an FAL, with wooden stocks compared to the English FNs, which instead had plastic and polymer stocks. These two are by far the most widely used platforms in many non-aligned countries, or in countries that did not receive imports from Soviet bloc countries.
Spoiler.
For example, and they are truly fantastic weapons. One, because they are very reliable, especially the FAL, and also from an operational point of view, the FAL is a great weapon. It can even double tap despite being a 308, so it's really interesting.
It's one of the .308S, or rather, it has the softest recoil of any I know.
Absolutely, yes. And the G3, having a very long action, unfortunately doesn't have this capability. Obviously, these are somewhat heavy weapons, a bit long, so they're not ideal. Still, as you taught me, these are weapons designed in the 1950s.
Yes, generally, absolutely, yes. I don't have strong feelings about the G3 either, because when shooting, it's a terrible weapon in many ways, so that's my take on these things. But I've heard very good things about the G3, especially in Africa, as truly indestructible weapons. What's your experience with the indestructibility of this platform?
They're old and they're still there serving every single day. I have to say, German engineering is wonderful. There are just a couple of specific parts that, once broken, are unfortunately hard to replace since you can't find spare parts, but overall I have to say it's an extremely reliable weapon, extremely durable.
And you told me something very important. During many patrols, you're often on foot, sometimes for days, as you mentioned. How much does the weight, that extra kilo or two, that a FAL or a G3 might have compared to another platform, affect this? Because that's 2 kilos less of other equipment you can carry.
Absolutely true. The G3, it really depends a lot on the person. A shorter person can definitely have more difficulty. We have a certain build. So above 100 kilos, let's say that extra kilo kind of evens out. So since we're over 100 kilos anyway, definitely 1 more kilo doesn't make any difference.
And with this, maybe you've answered this question perfectly for me. Let's move on to the second in the ranking, which is the good old Smoothbore shotgun. Aha! I cycled it out. Silver medal for the most popular weapon. Let's generally say smoothbore shotguns. You were telling me that, well, this is a specimen that has a polymer stock in particular, but that's pretty rare.
Yes, in Africa we generally have wooden stocks, at least the older ones, while the newer ones have polymer furniture, Maybe not exactly with the rubberized part, a more stylish finish, let's call it that. Also because new guns are always scarce, but most of them, let's say, can have wood, both in the stock and in the forend.
This specifically is a Chester SXP, but what are the models that you find more often, that you get more often?
There are definitely a lot of old Winchester models. That's also why I brought this one to you, and you can recognize them by the checkered grip like this. Then there are some Remingtons, there are definitely some Mossbergs, there are many brands, there isn't, let's say, a standardization. So whatever arrived or was left over, maybe given as a gift by hunters, would stay and then be given to the rangers. So there's really a great variety of models. But basically, they're always the same weapon, the same basic concept.
Yes, true. And is there a specific reason why you prefer a pump-action shotgun rather than, well, let's say a double-barreled shotgun, because there are also double-barreled shotguns, but rather than a semi-automatic?
So the pump-action shotgun, every time it's pump-action, or even double-barreled shotguns, yes, there are many cases where double-barreled shotguns are used and they are extremely reliable. And so even in cases of very little or no maintenance, there isn't a problem. The force itself, the very power of the ammunition, makes the bullet or the pellets or the shot come out in any case. And this is a great guarantee for weapons that are old, poorly maintained, and so on. So absolutely, reliability is number one. Every time we have a gas-operated system, we have the problem that in the jungle, in the parts where in the gas tube, rust can easily form. And this requires maintenance to prevent it or to eliminate it, to remove it, and that's the fundamental problem.
Speaking instead about ammunition, because obviously I would say that with smoothbore shotguns, the pairing of weapon and ammunition is fundamental. Right now we're shooting with classic clay target ammunition, but what kind of ammunition do they give you? What kind of ammunition do you use? Do you bring different types with you?
Well, ideally it would be really great to have more types, so you could react to different threats with different ammunition. Generally we have bird shot, so a small buckshot, just a bit bigger than what you're using now for clay targets. Ideally we try to mix different types of ammunition in the tube. Maybe the first one could be a slug, a Brennecke maybe, which is therefore able to stop a bigger animal. I'm not saying an elephant, because for those we need much larger calibers, but maybe a lion, a leopard. We want to stop it before there's a fatal accident, so we use that. Clearly, obviously on people it's overkill, it would be excessive. It depends. It depends on what's available, maybe a mix of what's more widely available and cheaper. That's the one for clay pigeons or for birds, let's say, maybe with a few bigger pellets to have more power overall.
As for the choice, because I imagine that when you go on patrol in your team, someone brings the shotgun and someone else brings the other weapons we've discussed and will discuss. Is there anyone in particular who has a preference for shotguns? How many shotguns do you bring? I mean, basically, how is the shotgun used within the group?
Well, it would be nice if there was an armory with different weapon systems, but the reality is that the pump-action shotgun is mostly used in those countries where regulations don't allow the use of other platforms.
For example?
For example, Botswana. Now, not everywhere, not always, but Botswana is one of those countries where it's very difficult to have firearms. For rangers, the shotgun is basically their standard weapon and it doesn't cause any problems. Not even from a visual impact point of view. I mean, seeing rangers armed with Kalashnikovs or things like that has a bigger visual impact. So the more westernized countries, let's call them that, might be shocked. Especially if there are tourists, they don't want to see a Kalashnikov, a ranger with a Kalashnikov. They want to see a ranger maybe with a rifle like this, something less scary. In those cases, everyone is armed with shotguns. And just like when we arrive in Central Africa or in Congo, everyone has an AK. It's very rare to split up. In our case, there's not a big need for it. All the more so since there are no drone threats, there are no strange threats that might require using maybe a 12 gauge mixed with other AKs.
Okay, very clear. I had to ask you the question because it came to mind. Interactions with tourists. Do you have any anecdotes? We were scared and we were going, we're lost. Did they meet you? So,
Personally, I've never had any problems. Also because I know that when there are tourists, you have to behave a certain way, be smiling, be open, and never hold your weapon in a way that could seem aggressive. Yeah, there are certain postures we use. For example, holding it balanced. That's one of those non-aggressive postures that gives the impression that I'm there to work. The weapon is an object. It's a tool. I'm not there to be a guerrilla fighter or a mercenary or anything like that. Then with a big smile and by talking to people, greeting them, explaining to them, we're here to do this, people generally understand. So personally, I have to say that I've always managed to fix everything with a smile and maybe by offering a good beer in the evening. So no, I can't complain. But some park managers are particularly sensitive about the subject, and there we follow certain protocols more strictly.
before getting to number one, which as you may have guessed will be the K, I picked a K that's a bit more sophisticated than what you actually have because that's the reality. But as a bonus, you were also telling me about some strange and rare weapons that you wouldn't expect to find in a park deep in the heart of Africa. Yes.
It's true. There are weapons, for example, in Zimbabwe, there are some Strybog. The Strybog are SMGs. So weapons that fire 9mm rounds, which have no real use for ranger work. Because we need a caliber that is potentially able to stop either an animal or possibly a threat from some terrorist who might want to harm us. Other strange weapons, for example, the FNS car in Cameroon, are often used.
Where did it come from?
It appeared because in the specific area where I was, we are in the Sahel, so in the border area with Nigeria, the eastern part of Nigeria, the Boko Haram area. So it's an area where the army and the rangers work side by side. And in this case, their weapons have become our weapons and we use the same platforms. This is why such an expensive and new platform is being used. Another very unusual one is the Molot, so a K in 12 in Ivory Coast. There are some parks that use only and exclusively these. Even they create a few problems because, as we said before, being semi-automatic, rust prevents the chambering of the second round. This is a big disadvantage. But the 12 gauge in the jungle is really dense. Well, anyway, I still know why, so...
Let me ask you another question. I know you're not really an expert on historical weapons, but has anyone ever tried to give you some really old gun, something over 100 years old, like an old English Lee Enfield? Go ahead.
Go ahead, absolutely. Yes, it was my first weapon.
Really?
The first time I worked as a ranger in South Africa, I was given an Enfield. So, well, it was pretty old. Luckily, I never had the chance to shoot at any animal, so I didn't get to see if it actually still worked.
Also because going out without even checking if the gun works, my God, seriously.
It was my first deployment. What was there was what I used. We're talking about almost 20 years ago now, so a lot of time has passed.
So, at the top of the list of the weapons you use most, there's obviously the K. Why? Maybe it's a stupid question, but maybe someone is wondering.
Well, first of all, because it's the most common weapon in the world. In Africa, entire containers arrive from Russia and China. So all the variants that can be found in the world can be found in Africa, especially those from East Germany, the Chinese Type 58s, but also a lot of Russian ones. We can see it from the markings, of course, on the weapons. In very rare cases, we also have civilian ones, but it's a matter of a few specific countries that were not, in quotes, supported by Russia, and therefore today have to buy the civilian versions, which are, in quotes, less reliable compared to the older ones.
To many, this will look like a very bare K. By the way, for anyone who might ask, this is a Romanian-made SAR one. It looks very bare and very basic. Didn't you say this is often seen as a luxury in Africa? Just having the stock and the sights is a luxury, because what condition are they often in?
So When I was in the jungle, for example, we had a lot of AKs, many were missing either the front sight or the rear sight, which already gives you an idea of how much you can use a weapon with just one sight. In most cases, the wooden stocks were rotten because we're talking about AKs that are at least 40 years old, which are used and handled every day for 12 hours a day in the rain. So either the stocks were replaced on the lathe, basically, by local carpenters, or they would simply leave it empty with a hole in the back. Even the front part often rots, precisely because it's made of wood. And in this sense...
Sorry, just a spontaneous question. Is the polymer, for example, worth its weight in gold?
Absolutely yes, absolutely yes. Plastic-based products are perfect in the jungle. Even for clothing, we use nylon more because it dries faster. On the other hand, when you go to drier areas, wood still tends to dominate. Because sometimes low-quality plastics, the ones that aren't very good, like what happened with, for example, the English SA-80, you might remember when I first went to Iraq, the plastic would melt. So plastics, yes, in the jungle, they're great, fantastic. And there are also those VZ58S, I've seen them. In that case, Bakelite holds up better. I think it's made of Bakelite.
Probably Bakelite, yes, there you go.
That one held up better, but unfortunately after so many years it cracked and so it was broken.
Have you ever received a rifle in such bad condition that you refused it? I mean, has it ever happened that you chose and said, no, I'll take something else?
I'm lucky. As a guest, they always give me the best one, so I can choose it.
So, another question. What's the worst one you've actually seen used, maybe by the Rangers?
Well, very often there was no longer the wooden cover, neither in the front nor in the back, and sometimes both sights were missing. So it was basically just the skeleton. It was just the skeleton, yes.
It worked if you pulled the trigger.
But only one shot at a time, because due to the rust, the piston couldn't retract. And the interesting thing is that they didn't have proper cleaning kits. The ones they had were total junk, so the brushes that looked new would lose all their bristles after just one use, and so it was completely full of rust. We know that if rust builds up around the AK's gas port, it can't cycle back.
Thank you. And speaking of another question, right, because the hood has the reputation of being the most indestructible and reliable weapon on the planet. What is your experience from this point of view? Is the hood really an indestructible weapon, or does it need maintenance as it obviously seems?
The fact is that there are weapons that have been there for 40 or 50 years, and many were actually manufactured in the 1950s or 60s, and they are used every day. They are still able to fire a shot. With almost no maintenance, it shows that they are truly reliable. Any other platform in Africa in the hands of the Rangers doesn't last more than 2 or 3 years, so it's actually true. Then obviously, if you want to use it fully, including bursts, because in Africa there aren't these kinds of problems, well, some maintenance is probably needed. If we want to avoid breakdowns due to negligence, well, maintenance always has to be done. There's no getting around it.
What is the hardest thing to find in Africa for this kind of maintenance?
For the kappa, well, you can hardly find anything, and that's why very often you have to rely on blacksmiths rather than carpenters, because there's nothing, really nothing. What we would really like to do with the Rangers, but we're not able to, is to modernize them with rails to replace the dust cover. Unfortunately, they're impossible to find, and besides that, the price is definitely very high. Secondly, you can't find the flash hiders either. Here, obviously, almost all of us have more or less new flash hiders that manage to compensate for the gas better and keep the weapon more stable when shooting. There, what you have is what you have. If we're lucky, we have the slice of salami, in quotes, as we call it. If not, there's nothing. In most cases, there's absolutely nothing. So the whole spare parts market is completely missing. Either they find another one or they take 2 or 3 and make one out of them. Fantastic.
I've done this before with other weapons. Thank you. I turned it.
Let's try the target from down there.
Africa is a huge continent, right? You mentioned the jungle, but I doubt I'll only be there. What distances are we dealing with? Also, when you said you have no sights, I wondered, how do you manage at longer distances?
Well, that's a great question. So it clearly depends on the environment. Africa is huge. There are practically all possible and imaginable biomes. So it can happen that the shot is longer or shorter. But we have to remember that for our type of role, we only use it in self-defense situations. Either from an animal or from a human being, a criminal, a terrorist who might want to shoot at us because they don't want to be arrested. So we're always talking about distances of less than 100 meters. Besides, I'd like to see how you could justify using self-defense at a distance of 300 meters.
Okay.
It wouldn't make any sense. You'd only risk possibly being convicted for excessive use of self-defense, or even for lack of legitimacy. Even more, it depends on how unreasonable the situation is. We use it for self-defense so much more often than not. I'd say a maximum of 100, but generally it's under 50 meters. So, distances where even a platform like this, even without sights, can still do something.
Of course, with an animal that's moving, maybe trying to attack you, it's probably not ideal in these cases. But yes, you do what you can with what you have. Exactly. Or am I wrong?
Unfortunately, you have little and you use what you have. Surely other platforms we talked about earlier are more suitable, but the K turns out to be what you have in most cases. Fortunately, the 7.62 caliber 7.62 X39 is still a caliber capable of stopping certain animals. Maybe not with a single shot, but with a series of shots. That's what poachers use when they try to kill a rhinoceros. To stop it, they basically shoot it in what they consider its knees. When the joint gives out due to the damage, the animal collapses and is no longer able to get back up. That's when they come with chainsaws, with pangas, with whatever they have, machetes, and they go to cut off the horn while the animal is actually still alive.
What can I say? Thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation, to try. Even though I know AKs a little bit, I discovered a lot of things. Today on Echo, someone complains that this is a very stock, very basic AK. Don't you ever complain again, because there are people who work with much, much worse. Again, thank you so much for inviting me to make this video. As always, we'll see you next time.